I want you to stop whatever you are doing right now and really think about this question, not skim past it, not nod your head and move on. Actually sit with it for a moment. Think about every person you have ever known who worked hard their entire life. Think about your father who left before sunrise every morning and came home after dark smelling like the job. Think about your mother who worked double shifts and still somehow managed to cook dinner and help with homework and never once complained. Think about your neighbors, your teachers, your uncles and aunts, the people in your community who punched the clock and did what they were supposed to do and played by every single rule they were handed. Now ask yourself honestly, how many of those hardworking, decent, disciplined people actually built real wealth? How many of them reached 65 years old with genuine financial freedom? How many of them woke up one day and realized the money was working harder than they were? I already know your answer. And your answer is the reason I am making this video today. The number is roughly 90%. 90% of workers, regardless of how hard they work, regardless of how loyal they are, regardless of how many hours they sacrifice, will reach the end of their working lives without meaningful wealth. Not because they were lazy, not because they were stupid, not because they made catastrophic decisions, but because they were operating under a set of beliefs about money and work and success that were fundamentally, mathematically, completely wrong, and nobody ever told them. Nobody ever sat them down and said, the map you are using to navigate your financial life is going to lead you somewhere you do not want to go. And by the time most people figure that out, most of the time they had available to fix it is already gone. I have spent the better part of my life studying why some people build wealth and most people do not. And I want to be very clear about something before we go any further. This is not a conversation about intelligence. I have met extraordinarily intelligent people who will die broke. I have met people with very ordinary intellectual gifts who became genuinely wealthy. This is not a conversation about luck, though luck plays a role in everything. And this is absolutely not a conversation about the moral worth of human beings. The 90% of workers who never build wealth are not lesser people. They are not failures. They are, in many cases, the hardest working and most admirable people I have ever encountered. What they are is uninformed about a specific set of principles that determine whether money accumulates in your life or simply passes through it. And that is what we are going to fix today. Let me start with what I consider to be the central foundational error that keeps 90% of workers permanently locked out of wealth. It is an error so deeply embedded in how we think about money that most people cannot even see it. They are so inside of it that it is invisible. Here is the error. Most workers believe, at a very deep level, that income and wealth are the same thing. They believe that if you earn enough money, wealth is the natural result. And this belief, this single unconscious assumption, is the reason the 90% stays 90% generation after generation after generation. Income and wealth are not the same thing. They are not even close to the same thing. Income is the water coming out of the faucet. Wealth is the water in the tank. And you can run the most powerful faucet in the world. You can have the highest salary in your company. You can earn more than almost everyone, and if there is no tank, if there is nothing holding and growing what comes in, you will have nothing. You will just be a very impressive faucet draining into the floor. The moment the faucet turns off, which it will turn off, everything stops. The money stops. The lifestyle stops. The illusion of financial security that you have been maintaining stops. And you are left at 60 years old with whatever tiny puddle happened to remain after 40 years of earning and spending. I have met people who earned $200,000 a year for 20 years and had almost nothing to show for it. $4 million flowed through their hands in 2 decades and the tank was nearly empty. And I have met people who earned $40,000 a year and built genuine wealth over time. The difference was never the size of the faucet. The difference was always what they did with the water. The difference was always whether they understood that earning money and keeping money and growing money are 3 completely separate skills, and that most people are only ever taught the first one. Here is something that schools will never teach you, and your employer definitely does not want you to know. The entire structure of employment, the entire design of the working relationship between an employer and an employee is specifically arranged so that the employer captures the wealth and the employee captures the income. Think about what a job actually is. A company takes your time and your skill and your energy and produces something more valuable than what they pay you for it. That gap, that difference between what you produce and what you are paid is how the company makes money. This is not a conspiracy. This is just how business works. But what it means practically is that as long as you remain purely an employee, as long as your only economic role is to sell your time and your labor to someone else, you are by definition on the wrong side of that equation. You are the input, not the owner. And inputs get compensated, owners get wealthy. Now I want to address something directly because I know exactly what some of you are thinking. You are thinking, okay, Warren, I understand the theory, but I have bills to pay. I have a mortgage and a car payment and kids in school and parents who need help, and I cannot just decide to become an owner. I do not have the capital to start a business. I do not have the time to build something on the side. Real life is more complicated than your framework allows for. And you are right that real life is complicated. I am not dismissing any of that. But I want to push back on one thing very specifically. The problem is almost never the absence of capital or time or opportunity. The problem is almost always the presence of beliefs and habits that make the existing capital and time and opportunity invisible. Let me show you exactly what I mean. The average worker spends somewhere between 15 and 20% of their after-tax income on what I would call status expenditures. Things bought not because they serve a genuine functional need, but because they communicate something to the outside world about the buyer's success and sophistication. The car that is nicer than necessary, the apartment in the building with the right address, the clothes with the right labels, the vacations that look impressive in photographs, the restaurants where the bill confirms that you have arrived. I am not here to shame anyone for any of this. Human beings are social creatures and status is a real psychological need. But I am asking you to look at this number honestly. 15 to 20%, in many cases more, and then I am asking you to consider what that 15 to 20% would become over 30 years if it were invested instead of spent. A person earning $60,000 a year who redirects 15% of their income, $9,000 annually, into a diversified investment account will have approximately $1.6 million after 30 years, assuming a historically reasonable rate of return. $1.6 million from a $60,000 salary without a promotion, without a side business, without any special financial knowledge or complicated investment strategy, just the simple, consistent, patient act of not spending 15% of what they earn on things that communicate status rather than build wealth. This is the math that the 90% never sees. Or more accurately, this is the math they see and then immediately explain away. They say, $9,000 a year, I cannot afford to put that away. And what they mean, if they are being completely honest with themselves, is that they are not willing to stop spending it on the things they are currently spending it on. I want to talk about something that I think is one of the most psychologically interesting and financially devastating phenomena in modern life. I call it the wealth performance trap. And it works like this. Most people, when they begin to have some financial success, when the income starts to rise and things get a little easier, face a choice. They can take that additional money and put it into assets, into things that will grow and compound and eventually generate income on their own. Or they can upgrade their visible lifestyle to match their new income level. And the overwhelming majority of people, 90%, choose the lifestyle upgrade every single time without fail. Almost automatically, they get a raise and they move into a nicer apartment. They get a promotion and they lease a better car. They get a bonus and they take a more expensive vacation. And none of these things are wrong in isolation. The problem is the pattern. The problem is that every time income increases, spending increases to absorb it, which means the gap between income and spending, the gap that is the only source of wealth building, stays flat or even shrinks. People spend their entire careers earning more and more money and somehow having less and less left over. And they cannot figure out why. They feel like they are doing everything right. They are working hard. They are getting the raises. They are living what looks like a successful life. But the tank never fills because every time more water comes in, they have already planned for somewhere for it to go. The wealth performance trap is so powerful and so pervasive because it feeds on something real. It feeds on the very reasonable human desire to feel like your hard work is paying off. When you have worked incredibly hard for something and you finally achieve a level of recognition and reward for it, the natural and entirely understandable response is to want to show it, to live it, to let the external circumstances of your life reflect the internal effort you have made. And there is nothing wrong with wanting that. The problem is that the most visible expressions of success, the things that most obviously signal to the world that you have arrived, are almost universally depreciating assets. Cars lose value the moment you drive them. Clothes go out of style. Vacations end. Restaurant meals are forgotten, and none of them generate a single dollar of return. They consume wealth rather than creating it. They are the performance of success rather than the substance of it. Let me tell you about the most counterintuitive truth I have ever discovered in a lifetime of studying wealth. The people who look the wealthiest are very often not the wealthiest. And the people who are genuinely substantially wealthy very often do not look it at all. This is not an accident. This is not a coincidence. This is the direct mathematical result of how wealth actually accumulates. Real wealth, the kind that generates freedom and optionality and peace of mind, is built by consistently prioritizing the invisible over the visible, by choosing the asset over the status symbol, by choosing the thing that grows over the thing that impresses. And those choices, repeated over decades, produce outcomes that look like luck or talent to people who never saw the choices being made. I drove a modest car for most of my life. I lived in the same house in Omaha, not because I was trying to make a philosophical statement, not because I did not enjoy nice things, but because I was always doing the math. Every dollar I spent on a car I did not actually need was a dollar that could not go into a business that would compound. And I understood at a level that I think most people never quite reach that I was not choosing between a nice car and a modest car. I was choosing between a nice car and what that car payment would grow into over 20 years. Once you see those as the real alternatives, the calculation becomes obvious. The modest car wins every single time, not because the nice car is not pleasant, but because the 20-year version of that money sitting in a productive asset is worth so much more than the 20-year experience of driving a nicer vehicle. Now I want to get into something that I think is the deepest and most honest part of this conversation, because everything I have said so far is true and it is important, but it is also the surface level. Underneath the spending patterns and the status expenditures and the wealth performance trap, there is a more fundamental issue, and that issue is the relationship that most workers have with discomfort. Specifically, the discomfort of watching your peers appear to live better than you while you make choices that prioritize your future over your present. This discomfort is real. It is not trivial. And anyone who tells you that it is easy to just ignore the social pressure and make the disciplined choice is either lying or has never actually experienced it from the inside. Here is what actually happens in the real life of someone trying to build wealth while living and working among people who are not making the same choices. You drive your modest car to the office parking lot where your colleagues have nicer ones. You bring your lunch while they go out to restaurants. You wear the same clothes for years while fashion cycles through them. You do not take the elaborate vacation and you watch the pictures go up on the feed. And every single one of these moments produces a small but real social friction, a tiny signal from your environment that says you are behind, that you are somehow losing, that the people around you have figured something out that you have not. And for most people, over time, that accumulated friction is enough to cause them to abandon the discipline, to tell themselves they have been working hard and they deserve to enjoy the fruits of that work, and to step right back into the wealth performance trap. The 90% who never build wealth are not beaten by big dramatic financial mistakes in most cases. They are beaten by this, by the slow accumulation of small capitulations to social pressure and immediate comfort, by the 1,000 individual moments over a working lifetime where the visible choice won over the invisible one, by the gradual unconscious decision to perform wealth rather than build it. And the tragedy is that none of these individual moments feels like a catastrophic choice. None of them feels like the moment everything went wrong. They all feel completely reasonable in context. They all feel justified. And they are all cumulatively the difference between building wealth and never building it. I want to talk about something very specific now that I think almost nobody discusses honestly when they talk about wealth building. And that is the role of what I call invisible assets versus visible assets. Most people, when they think about assets, think about things they can see and touch and show to other people. Their house, their car, their furniture, their possessions. And there is a reason for this. Visible assets provide something that invisible assets cannot. They provide the immediate psychological reward of being seen as successful. Every time someone compliments your house or admires your car or notices your clothes, you get a small but real hit of social validation. And human beings are wired, deeply and powerfully wired, to pursue social validation. This is not a character flaw, it is biology. But the assets that actually build wealth, the assets that actually generate the compounding returns that create financial freedom, are almost entirely invisible. A stock portfolio sitting in an investment account generates no social validation whatsoever. Nobody walks past your portfolio at a dinner party. Nobody compliments you on your index fund. Nobody asks you about your dividend reinvestment strategy at a family gathering. The wealth that is being quietly built, compounding in the background of your life, producing no visible signal of your success, generates none of the psychological rewards that humans are biologically programmed to seek. And this is the fundamental war at the heart of wealth building. It is a war between your biology and your mathematics, between what makes you feel good right now and what will make your life better over the next 30 years. The 90% who never build wealth lose this war, not all at once, but consistently over time in the small daily and monthly choices about where money goes. They choose the visible over the invisible. They choose the immediate reward over the compounding return. And they do this, let me be very honest about this, with perfectly good reasons every single time. The reasons always make sense in the moment. The logic always holds locally. It is only when you zoom out and see the whole 40-year trajectory that the pattern becomes visible and the cost becomes clear. Let me now talk about something that I think is perhaps the most important practical insight in this entire conversation, because understanding why the 90% never build wealth is useful. But what you actually need is a way out. And I want to give you the most honest, most practical version of that I am capable of providing. The way out is not complicated. I want to be very direct about that. The financial principles involved in building wealth are not sophisticated. They do not require advanced mathematical knowledge. They do not require special access to information or markets. They are, at their core, extremely simple. The difficulty is never intellectual. The difficulty is always behavioral. Here is the entire framework of wealth building compressed into its most essential form. You must consistently spend less than you earn. You must take the difference and put it into assets that grow over time. And you must leave those assets alone long enough for compound and produce meaningful results. That is it. That is the whole thing. Spend less than you earn, invest the difference. Be patient. Every wealthy person I have ever known, without exception, built their wealth on some version of this framework. The sophisticated strategies, the clever tax structures, the complex investment vehicles, those things can enhance and accelerate the process, but they are not the foundation. This is the foundation, and it is available to anyone. The reason this simple framework is not followed by 90% of workers is not because they do not understand it. Most people who hear this nod their heads because they already know it at some level. The reason it is not followed is because following it requires a sustained daily, sometimes uncomfortable choice to prioritize the invisible over the visible, to choose the asset over the status signal, to tolerate the social friction of living below your apparent means, to resist the wealth performance trap every single time it presents itself, which is constantly, which is every day, which is in every store and every advertisement and every social situation where money intersects with identity. I want to talk about the power of starting, because I think one of the most paralyzing beliefs that keeps people from beginning is the belief that they need to be in a different financial position before the principles apply to them. They tell themselves they will start investing when they earn more. They will start saving when the debt is paid off. They will start building when the circumstances are better. And this is perhaps the most expensive belief of all, because what it does is sacrifice the one asset that can never be replaced: time. Specifically, the early years of time when compounding has the longest runway to work. A person who begins investing consistently at 25 years old and stops at 35, who invests for only 10 years and then never touches it again, will end up with more money at 65 than someone who starts at 35 and invests consistently for 30 years. Think about that. 10 years of early investing beats 30 years of later investing, because the early years carry so much more compounding weight. The money invested at 25 has 40 years to grow. The money invested at 55 has only 10. They are not equivalent. They are not even close to equivalent. And every year of delay, every year of waiting until the circumstances are better, costs more than most people will ever fully understand. I have watched people wait their entire careers to begin building wealth. They always had a reason. The debt first, the kids first, the house first, the raise first. There was always something that made right now the wrong time to start and later the right time. And later never came with the urgency that now carries. Because later is always theoretical. Later is always in the future, where everything will be better and easier and more organized. Now is always complicated and imperfect and inconvenient. And so they waited. And the compounding waited with them. And then they were 60 years old, and the math had run out of runway, and there was very little that could be done. Let me say something about the myth of the perfect moment, because I think it is doing enormous damage to the financial futures of an enormous number of people. There is no perfect moment. There will never be a time in your life when all the debts are settled and all the obligations are met and the circumstances are perfectly aligned for you to begin building wealth. Life does not organize itself that way. Life is always messy and complicated and full of competing demands on your money and your time. If you are waiting for the chaos to resolve before you begin, you are waiting for something that will not arrive. The people who build wealth do not do so because their circumstances eventually became perfect. They do so because they decided to begin anyway, inside the chaos with whatever was available to them, and they kept going. The most powerful sentence I can offer you in this entire conversation is this: start with whatever you have today, not with what you wish you had, not with what you hope to have in 6 months, whatever you can actually set aside today, $20, $50, $100. The amount is almost irrelevant in the beginning. What is essential is the habit. What is essential is the practice of consistently directing a portion of what you earn toward assets rather than consumption. Because the habit, once established, scales. The $20 becomes $50. The $50 becomes $200. The practice grows with your capacity to feed it. But it has to start somewhere, and somewhere is always here, and someone is always now. Here is what I want you to take from everything I have said today. 90% of workers never build wealth, not because the game is impossible, but because they are playing a version of the game that cannot produce the result they want. They are playing the income game when the wealth game requires something fundamentally different. They are performing success rather than building it. They are choosing the visible over the invisible and the immediate over the compounding, and they are doing all of this with perfectly understandable reasons, with the full support of their social environment, with the encouragement of an entire consumer economy that profits from their choices. But here's what is also true. You now know this. You understand the mechanism. You can see the trap clearly enough to step around it, and that knowledge is genuinely worth something. Not because knowing is enough, it is not. You have to act on it, but because you cannot change a pattern you cannot see. The 90% cannot escape a trap they do not know they are in. You are no longer in that category. You have looked at the map. You have seen where the road actually leads. And now the question is simply whether you are willing to choose differently than the path that everyone around you is walking. I have lived a long time. I have made a great deal of money, and I have watched a great many people make and not make a great deal of money. And if I could compress everything I have learned into a single observation, it would be this. Wealth is not the reward for hard work. Millions of extraordinarily hardworking people prove that false every generation. Wealth is the reward for understanding how money moves and positioning yourself on the right side of that movement, for choosing consistently and patiently and sometimes uncomfortably the asset over the status signal, the compounding over the consumption, the invisible over the visible, the inner reality over the outer performance. The 90% who never build wealth are not unlucky. They are not incapable. They are not undeserving. They are simply uninformed and then too comfortable inside that misinformation to change. You are now informed. What you do with that is entirely up to you. But I will tell you this with every ounce of conviction I have. The door is open. The math is on your side. The time, whatever time you have left, is enough to begin. The only question that remains is whether you will choose to walk through. I hope you do. Thank you.